They look like slot machines. They sound like slot machines. Just like slot machines, they promise...
watch it spin and watch you win.
But here's the thing, you can't win. You'll never strike it rich playing these games because the jackpots, they pay out in virtual coins and there's no way to cash them out.
We found in our research that young people are certainly playing these games.
In the privacy of your own home, in a work break, whenever you want to, because you've always got a phone in your hand.
They should be banned.
This is the world of social casinos, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. The games are free to play to an extent. If you run out of virtual coins, you'll be prompted to buy more. The social casino industry is no game. It's dominated by some of the world's biggest names in gambling. There's a chance you've been bombarded with ads like this on social media.
Yes, yes. Look at that huge win.
Ads that contain the kinds of messages that wouldn't be legal if this was a gambling service.
Gambling has been around for a very long time, will continue to be. This is the next form of it, this is the next era.
And now the federal government's stepping in.
There is growing community concern around the harms.
So, is this harmless fun, or is it putting the pokies in your pocket? The owners of these games say they're nothing more than any other video game, but while you can never win money, you certainly can lose it.
It's affecting people, it's hurting people, it's incredibly real.
But if you can't actually win anything, why do people pay to play?
More than anything, you kind of zone out a little bit when you're playing them. You can just keep tapping your screen, the reels will keep spinning. You see all the same things that happen with pokies, for example, where, you know, bells and whistles go off when a win happens in the game. It can be a really relaxing game to play, something that you can play if you want to zone out for a little while, or if you need an escape from things that are going on in your life. If you watch a lot of people playing pokies, they sit there and just keep hitting the button, and they don't actually really care about wins. Often once the music starts playing, they'll hit the button again just to get that next spin happening. The wins aren't necessarily something that people want out of these games. It's more the experience and the escape.
I had one client in particular, and she'd been gambling for got to be 25 years at this point. She's migrated from poker machines onto social casino gaming. This particular person, who initially was only spending sort of $50 to $100 a week, advanced to probably $200 or $300 a week from the time that I was talking to her a couple of months ago. That amount of money is a huge sum of money for someone who's already financially in hardship and already someone who's adversely affected by problem gambling. She's spending, she's losing, she doesn't know where it's going, and she goes back there again and is not even sure where that money goes either.
For a very small number, the losses can be huge. Last year, a woman in Mackay was jailed for fraud. She'd spent hundreds or thousands of dollars a day on simulated gambling games, all up, stealing nearly $1 million from her employer to continue the habit. There are a heap of similarities between these simulated casino games and the regular pokies. For one, the people who play them.
There is an overlap of people who play social casino games and engage in real money gambling. This is obviously driven by an interest in gambling-themed games.
There's limited research, but what there is generally finds an association between people who play both types of game, especially among people who spend real money on playing them. Including this from Professor Gainsbury. In here, she says paying players were more likely to be younger, male, speak a non-English language, and have a university education than non-payers.
We see an increasing number of young adult men who find themselves with experiencing significant gambling harm, and part of their story is online social casino games.
What's a little less clear is if one leads to the other. Does playing a game like this increase the chances that you'll go on to play the pokies, or could perhaps go the other way?
What is really clear is that these products appeal to the same people who take part in gambling anyway. And that's potentially a bit of a concern because a lot of the people who take part in these gambling activities are often at risk of harm.
One Canadian study looked at people who'd never gambled before and surveyed them on their use of these games. It then revisited them 6 months later, and at the end of the study, 26% of them had taken the step to online gambling.
we found that they were trying out gambling in a safe environment, the social casino games, and then they thought, if I'm going to be spending money, well, I may as well pay to play something that I actually have an outcome, something that I have an opportunity to win.
Here's what the industry itself says. There's no causal evidence that social casino games encourage people of any age into real money gambling. Social casino is a long-established, researched and understood video game genre that's played for fun by millions of people worldwide. But being so accessible on your phone means that anyone can play these games.
I mean, where can't you do it from? At home, on the bus, on the toilet, at work, wherever you want to be. You know, it's always available, it's always there.
They're only meant to be for people aged 18 plus, but that doesn't seem to be working. Various studies suggest between 12 and 25% of adolescents play social casinos. But that's not what the industry says. In 2018, it commissioned and published research that insisted less than 0.25% of players are under 18, and just 0.008% of players are under 18 and spend money in the games.
We found in our research that young people are certainly playing these games. We know that young people often change their age on social media platforms to gain access because there's no actual age verification. Young people are much more likely to list their age as higher than it actually is. So it's highly possible that, although industry statistics indicate that they're not playing the game, that young people are accessing these.
These are gateway drugs into more insidious forms of gambling harm that can be experienced by those who use them.
The federal government sees that as a problem, and it says it'll now crack down on who's allowed to play these games using the existing video game classification rules. It wants all games with any simulated gambling to attract a minimum rating of R18+. That change would require the states and territories to agree.
Research undertaken by my own department indicates that simulated gambling within games certainly does have a link between real-world, online and other harms.
Along with simulated gambling, the government's also moving on paid loot boxes. Players can buy loot boxes with real money without knowing what's inside. You won't know what you've bought until you've parted with your money.
$500 later.
The government wants games with paid loot boxes to carry a minimum rating of M. It doesn't restrict access to kids, but it's a warning.
A parent, for example, would expect that if their children had purchased and was playing a game and that game contained some simulated gambling, that they have a right to know about that.
The industry says it supports age ratings. Its own guidelines say casino-style social games should specify that the games are intended for use by those aged 18 or over. And the government says these changes are a first step in a more comprehensive look at whether Australia's gambling laws are fit for purpose. The connections between these video games and the gambling industry, they run deep. For one, many of them share the same owners. Headquartered in Sydney, Aristocrat Leisure is one of the largest gambling machine manufacturers in the world. It's got machines operating in more than 100 countries. And Aristocrat has been heavily investing in these so-called social games. Some of their games look suspiciously like the real gaming machines in clubs and casinos. Aristocrat has a range of slot machines called Lightning Link. They look like this, and you can play them at licensed venues.
Lightning Link has truly been a game changer for Aristocrat. It is one of the biggest products in the world, and we are truly excited to add more games to this family. My favourite game is Tiki Fire because it's got a lot more volatility with the multipliers.
Tiki Fire also happens to be a game you can play in Aristocrat's Lightning Link social casino game. The same name, the same design, but this version, it's not gambling. There's also Heartthrob, the social casino game, and the poker machine, or King of the Nile, the gambling version, and the non-gambling version. You may have seen ads for some of these games on, say, your TikTok or your Facebook feed.
I'm always winning. I love this game.
But here's where it gets a little bit murky. It's not legal to advertise pokies in Australia. Here's the New South Wales law. A person must not publish or cause to be published any gaming machine advertising. So it's reasonable to ask, Does this count as gaming machine advertising?
Where all your favorite slot machines are in the palm of your hand.
If it's deemed that a social media or social casino game is marketing a product that is very closely replica of a gambling product, this might be an opportunity for gambling regulators to step in and take some action.
So we asked the New South Wales regulator, Liquor and Gaming New South Wales. A spokesperson said they're looking into that.
There's a bit of a grey area there in terms of what counts and what doesn't. And gambling companies have shown they're willing to explore those.
Here's another thing that the social casinos and the pokies have in common. They both bring in a truckload of cash.
We've got strong market-leading positions in social slots where we're number one.
Aristocrat Leisure started growing its digital business at the end of 2012. That's when it bought social casino operator Product Madness for $10 million. That small investment paid off fast because digital revenue was in the hundreds of millions by 2014, and it's grown ever since. Over time, Aristocrat's kept buying up new companies. In 2017, it dropped a lot of lobsters to buy Big Fish, another social casino publisher. The next year, digital revenue surged to $1.3 billion. The year after that, $1.8 billion. Then the pandemic hit, and while Aristocrat took a revenue hit from traditional gambling services, digital revenue kept growing. In 2022, the company brought in nearly $2.6 billion in revenue from its digital business, none of which is treated as gambling.
Social casino games are one of the most popular and profitable genres of mobile games, and their popularity and use massively increased during the COVID-19 pandemic.
You saw a migration, an involuntary one at that, away from poker machines and other traditional forms of gaming to the online space.
That digital revenue, it's not all from gambling simulation games. The company owns other casual and social games as well. But casino games, that's where Aristocrat started, and customers spent more than $1.4 billion in those games last year.
If you look at the numbers of the business, about 50% of the Pixel United business is social casino.
Last year, those games had more than 5.5 million daily users.
If you have a particular issue around gambling, you can at least avoid a venue, but it's very hard to avoid your phone, and that's why it's become so destructive for so many people.
Aristocrat's one of the world's biggest publishers of social casino games, but it's far from the only one. There's also Caesars. You might have heard of it with its world-famous casino on the Vegas Strip. And that gaming empire, it also owns a series of social casino games, and it has some of the most popular in the world.
There's no doubt that the gaming and gambling industry win from these games. Big multinationals win from these games. Who loses from these games is the general public in terms of just the extraordinary amount of money that's been poured into these every single day.
These games emulate so much of the pokies experience. The sights, the sounds, the levels, even to the characters and the themes within the games. But there are some big differences as well, and the fundamental one is the fact that the pokies you play in venues are strictly regulated. Each spin of the pokies has to be random, it has to be independent. Machines can't have memories, and you must have the same chance of winning every time you spin. In clubs and hotels in most states and territories, machines have to pay out over the long term at least 85% of what's put in. In the ACT in South Australia, it's a little higher, and the minimum return rate's usually higher again in casinos. None of that applies to social casinos. Developers are free to vary the odds of winning from spin to spin.
They pay out a lot more than real-world gambling would be expected to. It's important consumers aren't misled in any way to think that their outcomes on a simulated game with no real-world value are similar to what they should expect if they play a real money casino.
And there's nothing stopping them from manipulating the odds to maximise the chances that you keep playing for longer or spend money. And that could trick people into thinking they know how to win.
Among our research participants, a substantial amount were saying that they expected their skills were increasing and that they were getting good at these games and they would have favourable outcomes if they went and played real money gambling games.
And that has been, a fairly reasonable cause of concern because it may groom people to take part in gambling later on.
The government is focusing its attention for now on how these social casinos are classified as video games, because that's how they are classified, as video games, unaffected by that long list of gambling laws. But there is a bigger debate about whether these games are in fact gambling and whether they should be treated as such.
The Australian regulatory framework is quite clear. If a game is paying out money, then it is gambling and it is regulated under that regime. If it does not pay out money, it is considered a game, which is regulated under the National Classification Scheme.
It is a difficult area for gambling regulators or regulators to look at, but it's important that we do take up this challenge and look at social casino games and the impact that they are having in society to make sure there aren't any negative consequences of these games being freely available.
The government could look at things like spending limits to stop people spending more than they can afford. But others think that they should go a whole lot further than that.
They are harmful in and of themselves, but the gateway they provide into more harmful forms of gambling is such that they should be banned.
This is an enormous issue and something that affects a lot of people. We shouldn't ignore it and we shouldn't make the mistake of thinking it's going away.